Start off the meeting by welcoming everyone and asking for public comment. Are there members of the public here? Okay, seeing that there's no one here, we'll move on to our action items to ask for approval first of our meeting minutes from our September meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. And we'll ask for our approval of our 2017 meeting schedule. Is it a motion?
I move approval of the schedule, and I don't have it in front of me, but I've seen it.
Okay. Well, there's a motion and a second by Mayor Beavis. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the 2017 meeting schedule has been approved. All right, information items. Brad.
Great. And I think, of course, the legislative schedule, the meeting schedule you just approved was the legislative committee schedule for 2017, which is a requirement that we publish that. But as I think Commissioner Long at the executive committee appropriately said, subject to life occurring, the meeting schedule might change. It might change, yeah, looking out into the future. The informational item that I wanted to cover first at today's meeting was to give you sort of an update of where we are with, especially our meetings with state legislators. And then in front of you is a revised draft state legislative priority list. And then Steve Palmer's on the phone. And I think we can have a little discussion about a draft federal priority list as well, leading up to our planned joint meeting with the HART Executive Committee on October 31st. The idea would be that we would share this our tentative priority lists with HART. They would share whatever theirs is with us. We would have a discussion on what we might collaborate and work together on at that meeting on the 31st. We would then come back to this legislative committee in November, and you would approve it finally for recommend to the PSTA board on December 7th, still well in advance of the legislative committee week starting, and really the federal process starting again after the election. So with that, I would say maybe Ron and Natalie can maybe just talk a little bit about the legislative meetings we've had in the last month or so, and we can kind of walk through these three priorities. Ron, you want to?
Absolutely. So far we've met with Representative Kathleen Peters, Representative Ahern's office, and Representative Chris Sprouse. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the Peters meeting and maybe some of the suggestions that she gave us, because she had just come off a meeting with Senator Latvala and I think had some, valuable insights for us.
Well, and Brad and I attended that meeting with her, and we really used her as kind of a sounding board. And again, she was, in a way, not only giving us her advice, but the advice that she had just received on how she needed to be moving forward with her things that she was going to be engaged on. Basically, she did speak to us specifically on the issues, and that's how, in part, we started to cull down into a very focused agenda. But her very specific direction was, because of the appropriations issues that they're going to be facing as a state because of the legislative budget forecast, that one of the key things she says, she looked at us and said, if it's over $1 million, don't even bother. I mean, she was very candid. So she was very, very, candid in that our strategic approach needs to be very realistic, was the word she kept using, and we need to be very focused on those couple core things that we needed. And she really focused us on those issues that we can find champions on, and that she was kind of shying or pushing us away from anything that was going to have significant capital investments, and capital dollar investments that were going to be needed, like again, over $1 million. But I think really what she was doing for us was just trying to give us a kind of a reality check that we were going to be in a very interesting dynamic because of the financials, that we needed to basically prioritize, pick our winners and then put all of our eggs, you know, not in one basket, but into the baskets that we really cared about. Because if you diluted your ask, she felt that we would get lost in the mix. We really had to be focused and hone in and decide what we really would define as a success to take away.
Commissioner?
So I'd be interested in what was the revenue forecast? That sounds from your messaging that it was a bit dire, but I haven't heard anything like that.
So they just did a revenue forecast, and Alan's on the phone and he can chime in as well.
Hi, Alan.
Hey, everybody.
They just did a forecast that shows, all things being equal for 2017-2018 budget, size, the growth of government coupled with the growth of revenue, it basically is a wash, which means if you fund just the growth of current programs and services that are out there, there's enough to fund that in 2017-2018. If you go out to 2018 and 2019, and here's the key, Commissioner, is if they do nothing, so there's business as usual, the revenue that's coming in, you would have almost $1 billion shortfall in 2017-2018. Not necessarily because the revenue of the state is decreasing. What's happening is the size of government programs and partnerships or programs and services is not keeping up with revenue. One of the biggest drivers of that is we've lost low-income pool dollars from the federal government over the last 3 years. What's happened is the legislature has gone in and made policy decisions where they've been plugging non-recurring revenue for some recurring items and some other things. Some of those policy decisions are now catching up to them.
Yeah.
And what's not included in the forecast is, you know, the Seminole Compact, one small portion of that expired dealing with card rooms. They're gonna probably come back and deal with that during the 2017 session. That revenue is not a part of that forecast. That offsets a part of the $1 billion. You know, they have to tweak some things. For example, there's already been talk about, as you know, how can they control Medicaid? So as Medicaid continues to grow at such a rapid, you know, pace, what can they do this year, which would offset the growth of Medicaid for 2017-2018, which also would bring that $1 million down, or $1 billion deficit down. So that's the budget issue they're facing in Tallahassee. And I think to Representative Peters' point, and I think what Senator Laval is telling people is, number one, there's not going to be a ton of there'll be projects in the budget because there's projects every year, but having large member projects or large projects that are brand new that really hasn't proven a return on investment to the state, I think those would be a challenge to get in the budget this year. So, Alan, anything I'm missing?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. All the conversation around the budget has, the challenges in the budget have been that, you know, the legislature, because we have had a few good years, kind of post-recession where everything really died here in Tallahassee. They tried to ramp a lot of that up, and some of that is coming back to bite them now from a policy standpoint, from a budgeting standpoint. And the healthcare issue remains. It's been an issue the last 2 years. It can continue to be an issue. I think what the chairman and what the members of the House that I've talked to have really focused on is exactly what Ron said. They are going to, in years past, you could talk about return on investment, and if you could make even just a baseline case of return on investment, you had a decent shot of getting at least something in the budget. Getting through the governor was a different story, but getting it through the budget, getting it in the budget was usually something that could be done. I think the legislature itself, especially with the incoming House leadership, is going to take a very, very, very hard look at those member-specific projects and how they get into the budget. I think it's going to be a tough year. We're going to do a lot of hard work in explaining to really lay out the case and the argument. But I know Brad's going to talk a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about our priorities specifically. But that's also, we have some priorities that aren't member-specific projects that are delegation projects. And I know we're not there yet, so I'll let us get there before we talk about it. But things that can be delegation priorities as opposed to one-member priorities are going to be extremely helpful in what we're trying to do moving forward. So that's all I would add.
So, Alan, my transportation plan should be music to the ears of the legislature because it should potentially be very much consolidating a lot of current agencies and better using our dollars that we have to get a bigger bang for the buck. That's exactly what we should be doing, right?
Right. Now, I think that projects like that, as they have the support of the delegation, and not just the Pinellas delegation, but broader delegations. And I think those are the types of big ideas that the members of our delegation who are either in leadership or coming into leadership are going to want to take a very strong look at.
You know, and I think to one of the Alan's points is I think what you'll see happen this year is I think you'll see the House initially pass what I would consider almost a bare bones budget. You'll see the Senate pass a more traditional budget, which would include some of the president's priorities, some other kind of traditional member projects, and so on. They'll have to work out those differences probably in conference, obviously. Really quick, we also met with Representative Sprouse, and he had some really good insights on, and we'll talk about the agenda itself in a second, but he had some insights on how to deal with the letter, had some insights on the $1 million for PD&E for the Clearwater Beach Causeway bus lane. And one of the things I think he was, that was encouraging from him is that, especially in the $1 million for PD&E, is that, Brad mentioned that if we can get those dollars from the state, there's potential to get federal dollars to help fulfill that project, and that's music to their ears right now. So in other words, if you can be able to demonstrate to the state, again, return on investment, you invest X, maybe the federal government or local governments can come in and invest Y. That's going to be key in some of these decisions as we move forward.
And that was something that Peter's actually echoed to me, and I just pulled my notes up from my meeting with her, because she said to us there was three things. It had to be at the right threshold of dollars, and it had to have the ROI, as Alan said, and she also made 2 points that she wanted us to go home with. It has to be data-driven, and it has to come with a high match for rating, a high rate of match. And if you can check those boxes as that bare bones is coming out of the House, that's going to be that tool that they use to negotiate. The Senate does, back and forth. It hits all those criteria.
Good.
Well, should we talk about each of these items?
Yeah.
Have a little discussion about each of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
The list you see in front of us was modified following Representative Peters' meeting to add the sub-bullets about being very specific, which is something she suggested, like what is the request? And as you can see there's only one project that actually has a monetary request. It's $1 million for the number 3, the bus lane for PD&E. It meets Representative Peters' stated max goal. The project needs $16 million, but she said we could only have $1 million, so we put $1 million on there.
Well, she didn't say we could have $1 million. She said that would be the most likely.
The max. That would be the max.
Wish she had said we could actually have it.
No, she didn't. She didn't. That's right. Thank you.
Kidding.
So number 1, again, is not a request for funding through the legislature, but it is modeled after the Central Avenue BRT successful process where we ultimately pulled that request from our legislative priority list and had Senator Latvala and Brandis and some state representatives contact the Florida DOT and Secretary Steinman, and that is how, and then ultimately FDOT agreed to fund the study that we're undertaking right now on that project. This is a similar request because it doesn't really lend itself to a earmark anyway, because it's ongoing operating funding and what we need, which the FDOT can fund if they prioritize. We're asking for a delegation letter, and as maybe right before we adjourn this meeting or call this meeting to order, Ron was saying we're talking about having perhaps some Hillsborough delegates sign the letter and Pinellas legislators to sign the letter. I think Representative Peters and Ahern staff who we met with and Sprouse thought that was a good approach. As we were discussing, Representative Sprouse was hesitant. For him, we had talked about maybe he being the lead on the letter, but he sort of backed off that suggestion. Maybe the idea of having it signed by the chair of the delegation or something might be an alternative, or just not having him be on that letter.
And just some context, and Alan, we talked about this just before you got on the phone, is that I think what Sprouse's concern is when they announced the leadership circle in the House in the next couple weeks leading up to session, as a potential incoming speaker, he's going to be in that leadership circle, and he didn't want to have any undue influence of being either the lead on the letter or signing on a letter where it could be perceived that you're moving a project up on a list. Even though, again, this isn't really moving a project up on a list in the sense that it's not construction dollars, it's not a ranked project, it's trying to get dollars in the budget that would be operational in nature, so I think it's the commissioner talked about is if we could potentially look at maybe having the chair of the Pinellas delegation as well as the Hillsborough delegation sign the letter, that would be an opportunity.
Okay, yeah, well, you can certainly, look into the best way to do it, whatever he thinks is best. We certainly don't want to put him in a tough position as Speaker Corcoran rolls everything out, so.
Commissioner.
So at some point, Brad, are we going to get more meat on the bones of this request in terms of what is the dollar amount needed for the operating funds?
Yes.
And where does all that money come from? And what are the opportunities for additional monies?
Right, so this is a holdover. This was our #1 legislative priority last year as well. It's $2.1 million in annual operating expense. And we need to put together $2.1 million in annual operating expense, any way that can be. Whether that's, money from the Florida DOT, but again, it has to be on an ongoing basis, like some of their grants are. Like block grant funding is, that they give us each and every year. Some transit systems around the state of Florida, they earmark ongoing block grant funding for certain operating projects like this. But whether that requires a match or they don't give us all the full 2.1, and whether or not we need to work with our Tourist Development Council or others to support the ongoing operations of the project remains to be seen. We've talked about all of that at this committee level, whether we match it or whatever, but the current ask is for the DOT to fund 100%, and then whatever they're not able to fund, see if we can put together locally the remainder.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it would be beneficial, and maybe Ron, you could tell me if you think I'm off track, that we have a real strategy in place for this money, because I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to get some dollars from the airport itself, some dollars from both TDC organizations, Pinellas and Hillsborough, since this affects both of them. I think there's huge opportunities there. And I do know for a fact that bed tax dollars can be spent on transportation solutions as long as you have an argument that ties it to tourism. So to me, there is no question that this is a tourism-related transportation solution if we're bringing people back and forth from the airport to our beaches and to our communities over here. But it'd be important to have that plan flushed out a little bit, don't you think? I mean, it makes a stronger argument that we're just not all putting our money in one basket. And to me, as a former legislator, you're about to be one, I'd appreciate if somebody's coming asking me for money, but they've done the heavy lifting to figure out where else they can get funds as well.
Yes, and we have reached out. We've had meetings with the Tourist Development Council staff, or Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and they have been supportive of this. Certainly not supportive of them funding a significant amount of the $2.1 million yet. They talked more about providing some advertising dollars for it. I did meet with Joe Lopano, and he's a very nice man, but he did not want to commit to providing any ongoing funding for this, at least in my meeting. Now, perhaps, some other discussion and a larger framework, maybe he would have a different opinion of this. But so far, they're all looking for someone to put up some ongoing funding first, I think, before anyone else has been really interested in committing. My thought had been to maybe go ahead and do an RFP. We're planning on privatizing this service. It would be contracted out to a private provider. And we would go ahead and do the RFP even prior to having the money locked down, so that we would have a real cost and a much more fleshed out operating proposal about exactly how it would work, because we would have a vendor. There's some downside to that. I mean, vendors, if there's no real guaranteeing of, a real project, they may not give you the greatest pricing, or might be subject or whatever. But I think that, to try to get to, as you say, flesh this out a little bit further, that might help. And see if we can get some local dollars committed either by the airports or TDCs to match the Florida DOT money. That would be great.
And to your point, one thing that, Commissioner Sprouse and, Representative Sprouse and Representative Peters both said, if it's on the operating dollars or if it's on the actual amount for the project for the, for the bus lane, make sure that those numbers are real numbers. Make sure that,
Absolutely.
make sure to the best of your ability to make sure that whatever you're asking for, so don't come back and ask for X, and they come back the following and go, oh, we were just joking. It's really Y because, the numbers were off. So, so I know, Brad and the team will make sure that we do that. But that both of them did say, are these the real numbers, and make sure that you can substantiate how you arrived at those numbers.
So we'll keep pushing on that as best we can. Again, this idea was not unlike last year where we did started off asking for an earmark, not to ask for an earmark, but to ask them to support the project. We are also in a different position on this project because the MPO and the regional body, the Tampa Bay TMA, have both prioritized this project for the first time in their lists.
That was important as well.
What?
That was important to both of them as well, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that was the excuse last year when Cassandra and I went to FDOT. They said, well, get it on the MPO list and then we'll maybe talk about it. And then, now we have it on the MPO list. Now they say, get the legislators behind it and then maybe we'll talk to you about it, or whatever the next hurdle is. Number 2 on the list is...
Let's just see, before you go to number 2, does anybody else have any comments on number 1? Just want to... I thought that was a good discussion. I just wanted to add that I like the idea of the, listening to what Representative Peters is saying about the matching funds and showing the state how this return on investment will leverage up. I mean, I like Commissioner Long's comments about maybe we go back to these local entities like the TDCs and the airport and say, look, we're trying to put together a more specific letter. Could we get you to commit on a number and see what
Or
they say?
commit to support it.
So that,
Support the
I mean, is there a
concept, so-
draft letter yet? I mean,
We do have a draft letter.
do we have a draft letter?
For the delegation signed.
Okay.
we can, I'll provide that to all of you. I apologize if I
Okay. That was my other question, was just, maybe for the next meeting, we could start looking at the actual letter so that we could,
Yeah.
so, but I think that all sounds good. I'm excited to, hopefully see this the letter come together, and if it's signed by the delegation chairs, could we also have it signed, would it make sense to have it signed by the state senators too? I know we've had some discussion about, they're on the delegation, so they'll be included. Okay.
The discussion was, do we have each of them
Individually
sign it,
or just
and
the
or
chair?
does the chair on behalf of the entire body sign it?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. Any other comments on that
Who
issue?
is the Pinellas chair?
They
Sarah
won't-
Latvala, I think.
Right, but they
Or,
won't
well,
decide till after the
After
election.
the election. Okay.
And I'm assuming that as on most of them, they'll pick their new leadership at the first delegation.
Who's the
meeting.
vice chair this year? Flat Bella and who? Somebody from the House.
I don't know.
Alan, do you know by chance?
Yeah, no, I don't have it in front of me. I thought it was Kathleen, but now I don't think it is. I'll have to go back and check.
I think she was the chair last week.
Yeah, no, I think that's what I had in my mind.
What's usually the Senate, and the Senate has a member and the House has a
So it
member,
should be
so
the
it's
House
gotta be
next
one
year,
of
yeah.
them.
I'm pulling it right now. It's Chris Latvala.
Oh, okay then.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
he'll be chair next year.
Okay.
Great. Well, And that's perfect too, because this project is right in his neck of the woods there, isn't it?
Yeah,
So-
and he actually sponsored it. When we initially did this last year, we're going to make it a member request. Everybody just keep in mind, he's actually the one who put the request in. So this was his member project last year, until we were told to kind of change our strategy a little bit, so.
That's right. Okay, thanks, Alan. All right, so we've got a little bit of a game plan on that issue. That's a good discussion. All right, number 2.
Okay, number 2 is also a carryover from our priority over the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, to increase transportation disadvantaged funds. And as the committee might remember, again, I think we started off maybe 2 years ago with the thought that we have seen exponential growth in our demand for low-income transportation solutions in Pinellas County, and not received any, or very small increases in our funding from the State Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged. So increasing the pot specifically for Pinellas is obviously our goal. Last year, though, again, sort of the same tenor from Tallahassee, that we would like to broaden this for a long-term solution for PSTA and other issues. We discovered that there was this sort of dynamic of urban versus rural areas, and the way the formula allocated funding, statewide funding between urban and rural areas, favored rural areas. And so ultimately we led the charge to include some funding for a study which we briefly discussed at our, last month's legislative committee meeting, that the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage, after the legislature approved it, they have hired Qatar, University of South Florida at Qatar, and there was some concern as of a month ago that the scope had already been defined, and it was perhaps not how we believe the legislature intended the study, and it had already maybe moved quite along without any input. I don't know if it was our squawking or maybe some of the discussions we had with our great legislative team, but suddenly then I got a call last Thursday, said I had to be, last Wednesday, to participate that I was suddenly anointed as a stakeholder to this study, and that they wanted my input. And I think they're calling like 9 people across the state to get some stakeholder input. And after we had that discussion on, are you a stakeholder?
No, they didn't call me.
Oh, okay. I don't know who the other stakeholders are, but I feel much better about where the study is headed. I don't think that they have not concluded anything, or they're not really focusing specifically on rural areas or anything like that. And the Qatar folks seem to be doing a pretty thorough review of other states and other models for the formula and how to balance urban versus rural areas. Like a lot of formulas, there is sort of a bent to that ultimately leads to rural areas maybe getting a higher share, because there's a base amount that is allocated to each county in Florida. And so a small population county gets the same in the base part of the formula as Miami-Dade or Pinellas, and then there's some growth pieces to the formula on top of that. We learned a lot about the formula in the call that I had, so I think that will hopefully be at least very informative study that the legislature will receive. One thought I had, and I haven't talked to you guys about this, but whether or not, we could have any influence on, once the study is completed, is there a way to encourage the legislature to get a presentation on it, or, to get a key committee to
No, absolutely, and that's one thing we can definitely work with, is getting, probably be appropriate for the Transportation Economic Development Appropriations Committee to do a presentation. They'll do a lot of presentations early on in session. And since the legislature is the one that requested this study, that's something we could definitely put in early on during the committee weeks to ensure that we get on an agenda to have this presented to the House and Senate committees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, I'm actually having lunch with Teddy Pitts, the new staff director for Center Folks. I think it's next week. I gotta look at my calendar to be sure. Obviously, I do a lot of work in that space, so we get together about once a month. I'll bring it up to her and see. I mean, it's usually just an easy request for a presentation, but I'll see if there's maybe any changes to the procedure and just make sure that we're on her radar, and also make sure that she has copies of everything once it's done and out there. So.
Okay, well, great, yeah, we would definitely like to participate when that, if and when that gets scheduled. You know, the Cutter folks were a little bit hesitant to, I guess, you know, jump over the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage and just assume they got a chance to present it. So they sort of deferred it up to their client, the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage, to decide whether or not a presentation was necessary or whatever. But I think as an urban area, and I know there's a little coalition of PSTA and Orlando and Miami-Dade and Broward that are sort of getting together and have shown a lot of interest in following the study from the urban perspective as well.
Well, we want to make sure that wherever we try to land this, we want to try and do it around one of our trips to Tallahassee with our team, so that we can make sure that we're there in the room and have somebody there to testify.
Yeah.
If there's, or answer questions as appropriate and relevant to us. And obviously, we try to get ourselves included in that, so.
Yeah.
Any other comments about that? Well, I think it's great, Brad, that you're participating, and great to have our legislative team helping us navigate that moving forward. At the very least, it seems to me like we'll probably have a better public policy outcome with having the legislature reacting to a study as opposed to the way it sounds like these decisions have been made in years past, which is sort of like some 11th hour play by somebody with some power. Though I guess that may still happen, but at least we'll have the study. Okay, number 3, Clearwater Beach Causeway bus line.
Yeah, so last but not least, what is our one capital specific project that dovetails quite closely with number 1. I mean, it would certainly support project number 1. This is a exclusive busway lane that would be constructed from downtown Clearwater to Clearwater Beach. That would be open for public transit vehicles as well as emergency vehicles to access the beach, especially during times when the bridge, which is quite often, is completely backed up. And it takes forever to get over there. This is a project that has been conceptually designed for almost a decade now as a way to get to Clearwater Beach. It's a project that Senator LaValla is well familiarized himself with. The $16 million construction cost of it is an outdated estimate done by a MPO study from about 6 years ago that the MPO is working to refresh and to update as well. But the ask here would be to help support updating the design and cost estimate and ridership estimate about how such a exclusive bus lane would increase. The MPO's priority is to study beach access for tourists and others. So this ties right along with that. I talked this morning, I met with Whit Blanton and talked with him about once we move to approve our legislative agenda and trips to Tallahassee, if he would be willing to come with us to talk about this project as well as sort of the regional projects and some of the other things. And he said he definitely would be willing to do that.
Okay, any questions or discussion on that item?
Well,
Commissioner?
again, I'd like to see, when you say you're asking for $1 million, where's the other 15 million coming from?
Well, we would put together first of all, we want to make sure that we have a good number of 16 million is a good number. But we have talked about maybe that being our next Tiger grant application. Or, ultimately looking to cobble together additional capital dollars, either through a federal, probably a combination of federal and state sources.
Well,
But I know, again, just like as we discussed, we're not really in a position right now with a 2007 MPO study to put together, I think, a winning application right off the bat, without it getting a little bit more modern estimate, ridership estimate, et cetera.
And I think, Commissioner, to your point is, if we ask for the million, letting the state know that, number one, we would be hopefully pursuing some federal dollars. Obviously, there's no guarantee in that process, but if we pursue some of the federal dollars, and if we get the state to put any dollars in, as you know firsthand, once they start funding a project, if we have to come on the back end and ask for additional dollars, we'd be much more likely to fund it, A, since they've already funded a portion of it, and B, if they're able to successfully go after any federal or local dollars to offset whatever the number, if it's 16 million or 20 million, whatever that number happens to be, I think the state would be willing to be a partner, especially the federal government stepping in and putting in a large chunk of those dollars.
yes, and I agree with you. I just would like to see a more finite numbers here in terms of what the plan is, because right now, it just seems to me to be a little nebulous. I don't know, is that wrong-headed?
We've had a meeting with FDOT staff and MPO staff about the State Road 60 corridor evaluation, of which this is part. And the DOT is updating their bridge structure report on what's happening there. So they'll have a better idea of what they think their portion of it would cost. And then the MPO study would then fill in the gaps for where that corridor is in the city property. So I think within the next 6 months, we should have a pretty tight estimate on what we think that project would be. On top of that, it is likely not to be a PSTA project. It is likely to be an FDOT project, in which case if the MPO has it prioritized, the majority of the right-of-way is FDOT, and so if it is their project, but it benefits us greatly, then we let FDOT take control of the project itself, and I think that in and of itself is going to be beneficial for applying for federal dollars as well as any state dollars.
So how do we lean on FDOT to make it their project?
I think they feel like they own the bridge already, so as soon as we get the answer from them in the next couple weeks about whether or not they could retrofit the bridge for this lane, we'll be able to take that next step as to where we fit into that. But in the meantime, we're doing ridership estimates and other things with the MPO study that fills in the gaps for the project.
And just get them to commit in writing that it would be an additional lane on the bridge, right? And,
Exactly.
Well, I mean, to pick up on Commissioner Long's point, I think it'd be helpful, and we've sort of had this discussion before. So our plan is to take this to heart for the joint meeting in October, and then come back to the legislative committee, our legislative committee in November. I mean, I think it'd be helpful to take this sheet, I mean, these are the three concepts, but to take this sheet and make it into something a little bit more robust, so that if somebody picks this up at heart, they know kind of what we're talking about. I mean, and I know there's a lot of moving pieces to each of these, but I mean, we could maybe do like a one-pager for each of these ideas and talk about, like for instance, on this additional bus lane on the causeway that, we're working with FDOT on this study, we're working with the MPO on their piece of the study, and that will drive, just so that somebody that's new to these issues could pick it up and sort of understand where we are.
And to your point about making it attractive as,
Right.
as a joint priority, is that HART staff has also been looking at the connection between the greater Hillsborough area through the airport to the beach, because they also want to get people there. And so we have each, years ago, it was a few years ago, each individually applied for a part of this corridor. They wanted it to extend it to downtown.
Right.
So this, it could be part of a bigger project, but then
Good.
this capital piece becomes a critical part of that link.
Gotcha. I just mean I'm sorry, I just meant in terms of the product, in terms of the
Right.
piece of paper that we're showing as our priorities. I think it's good to have it sort of fleshed out in more detail, you know, what we're thinking.
And that's something that will definitely help you with, because what we do is when we end up going into Tallahassee, we have a one-pager, that's exactly what we call it, that will give the case, the warrant, and the ask. And it's very delineated and very clean, very clear what we're asking for. And what we then do is we use that, because at the end of the day, if you're successful, whatever you put on that piece of paper is what you better be able to defend against when you get the notice from the governor's office asking you what you're using the dollars for. So we actually back our way into it. There's a specific form that the governor's office uses, and we make sure that we're answering all the core questions that are going to be captured in that report. And I'm happy to share one with you so you can see one on our transportation project.
Okay.
Because we've done it before. So we actually use the governor's form to put the information required on the, as much as possible without giving, sometimes you don't want to give too much information. It's also a dance between putting yourself into a, you know, a spot where you can't move around, but we try to do that. So I'll be happy to share a template in the next week or so that we'll build for you guys for all of ours, that we'll dump these things in and that you guys would then approve going forward.
Great, because I think it'd be nice for our board to have that as what they're approving when our legislative priorities come to the board in December, because for a lot of our other board members, that's the first time they're really looking at these ideas, and so to see it sort of in a more finalized form, as opposed to just conceptual, which is perfect for this discussion, but, yeah.
Well,
Janet,
to the point that you just made about HART, you know, we have that joint meeting coming up, correct? To me, this is just one more way to show that we're working collaboratively across the county lines in an effort to get really big stuff done. And I know that there's several people in the legislature very interested in that. And it's just one more thing we can both agree on. So I do really strongly urge that one-page sheet to be available for our joint meeting, if possible, because it is an example of how, with partners, you can do more.
Well, it's something that we've done before, and it'll be a hybrid from what we've done, but for example, Ron and I have worked on what we call the Ticket Coalition. So if you do have a coalition of folks, so again, it's still going to be branded PSTA, but there's nothing saying at the bottom of our one-pager, we can't list those that we're aligned with in the coalition. With the coalition, we're actually in for this other ticket issue.
Right.
We actually almost created like a letterhead that's all the participating teams and venues. So when you do build a coalition out, it is always a good component to add, so long as you have absolute consensus on what's on the page. You
Right.
know, so.
Commissioner.
I just wondered if we could have a one-pager just for number 2.
They would all have their own.
Thank you, because we have to go at different times to address different.
No, you don't, we
Right.
wouldn't put them, you can have a cover page that, you will have your legislative agenda one-pager that has everything on it, but your individual one-pagers, that's the summary, the executive summary for each one will be individual.
Well, that's great, because on all these issues, I mean, we're familiar with the background because we've been working on them as a legislative committee, but I know other board members or interested parties may not know the background of, you know, the disputes about how the Transportation Commission for the disadvantaged allocates funds, and having that little background section, and then the way you described it.
And we need
sounds
them,
great.
when we make our meetings and our rounds in Tallahassee, we need these because so they're one-pagers that we create, but really at the end of the day, they're the leave behind. So when we walk into an office, this is what we leave behind with our business cards attached, so that when we call them back 2 days later, this is what they're referencing. This is hopefully what especially if we're dealing with staff, this is what they're putting in the members' file folder, their reading material for the night. This is the kind of stuff that we leave behind. So it's pretty standard protocol to have these for you guys.
Any other discussion about the state issues? Are there other state legislative priorities that aren't listed here that people want to discuss? Okay.
Again, I think, and part of the reason that we kept this very generic and bland and marked draft on it was because the original intent was to be in a more of a listening mode than an asking mode with the legislators that we've already met with. And then I don't know if we have any more planned or scheduled, but to the extent that we have any more prior to the election or then, even into November, we do want to be open to the legislators' intent, or at least that's what the legislative committee, you all have suggested. Be open-minded to the legislators' goals and try to meet their goals just as much as meeting PSTA's goals. So, but we will definitely put together the more fleshed out version for our meeting with Hart and then your vote to recommend this to the board in November.
That sounds great.
But I think we'll continue to, try to meet with whoever might be willing to meet with us.
Our goal would be to meet with the entire delegation between now and the end of December, going into January committee weeks. There's two committee weeks in December, but they're organizational in nature, and I don't think you see a lot. I mean, you'll see work starting to be done for the first time during the two committee weeks in January.
Okay. I do know that we should probably start planning on when we're going to go to Tallahassee in the springtime to get on your all's calendar.
We'll work on that and make a recommendation at the next meeting to get that on everybody's calendar.
Yeah.
And just the weeks that they're in there in January is January 9th and the week of January 23rd. And then they will be there in February on the week of the 6th, the 13th, and the 20th. So they're there 3 weeks in February. But, and this is, Brad, when I send you the October board update, this will all be on there again. It was on the September one.
Okay.
Okay, great. Alan, do you have anything else you want to add? We're about to move on from Tallahassee.
No, I think we've pretty much covered it all.
Okay, great. It's a great discussion, guys. Thank you. Federal.
Thank you, Alan.
Federal legislative work. Brad, you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Steve. Well, relative to the beautifully fleshed out state priority list, I don't even have it in the white paper for the federal one yet. Although I will say that, and as I think you will know, the federal year is a little bit different than the state year in that it's kind of ongoing, and we've really taken advantage, I think, very well, and I want to express my appreciation to Steve Palmer and Harry Glenn for their ongoing work with PSTA, not only on sort of congressional issues specifically, but also with all of these grants that we've applied for and then were successful at receiving. Last week, this announcement by Congressman Jolly of getting a $500,000 Mobility on Demand Sandbox grant. So that was...
Thank you, Steve.
yes. Thank you, Steve.
No, I'll just jump in real quick, Brad. I think you and Commissioner Long deserve the credit for that in terms of working with the delegation, particularly Congressman Jolly. So thank you for saying that, but I think you've done a great deal of the work and deserve a lot of the credit.
Well, yeah, that was great. That was great to get the announcement, and it will be a great program. That is yet another program that PSTA is going to be launching with our transit network companies. Like this go around, it's going to be with Lyft. And maybe Uber will be signing on as well, but Lyft will be helping out our paratransit customers with that. So the two items that I think that we really need to focus on and that I would put on a legislative priority list are, number one, again, continuing our prioritization of and asking for support for bus rapid transit funding appropriations for bus rapid transit, so that when we hopefully submit our Central Avenue BRT to the federal government next summer, that it will be smoothly inserted into the pipeline for funding. I think that certainly needs to be our number one priority. The second priority, which I think we should maybe add to our list, and we can have a discussion about this, is we've had some discussion about that we would advocate on behalf of the federal DOT and FTA, allowing for the rides in which we provide through partnerships with transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, or certain rides that we provide through Uber and Lyft to be counted in the formula for that FTA uses for allocating of funds. Right now, the partnerships that we have developed that are innovative with Uber already, and then this sandbox one with Lyft, they will not, the rides that we provide are not counted. They're not considered transit rides, so they're not counted toward our formula funding allotments that we get from the feds. And I know this issue, we've brought it up several times, and I know the folks at FTA are really studying this, and there's the sort of Office of Research that I deal with a lot, and innovation is all on board with what stuff we're doing, and they're trying to convince the rest of FTA that this is a good idea, that this is a really, futuristic, but the way transit's going to work in the future with these partnerships. But I think to the extent that we can get our legislative delegation attuned to this and then supportive of it, I know Congressman Jolly, he indicated he would be supportive of it when Commissioner Long and I were on the call with him for the sandbox grant. We talked, FTA mentioned it. So I think that's something that we should, I think, put some effort behind in DC when we're up there. Steve, I don't know if you want to opine on either the BRT or having the Uber and Lyft rides count items for a future legislative agenda for this committee to consider.
No, I think Brad, both of those are very important initiatives and very legitimate for PSTA to support, because as you said, the BRT funding is important because once the Central Avenue BRT project is submitted, we want to make sure there's going to be sufficient funding and support for the Small Starts program. So that's an important one, and I think obviously changing the formula would be very, very beneficial. If I may, just two other things that I would suggest consideration for as well. Certainly, continuation of the advocacy for grant funding is going to be important because while PSTA was successful on the Mobility on Demand grant, there still is going to be another round of bus and bus facilities, of low-no grants, and should you decide to do a Tiger grants. So they're going to be coming along this year and the following years. And then the other one is something that's very still amorphous, but both presidential candidates have been talking about an infrastructure initiative. We don't know what that really is going to be yet, but and we don't know how it would be paid for, even if they decided they wanted to do it. And there's no guarantee, Congress would support it. But I do think that having that in the federal advocacy plan, I think, would be beneficial as well.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that is a great point. We'll definitely have both those items. Certainly advocating for grant funding, I think, goes without saying. That should always be part of our federal advocacy.
Now, Brad, I have a question on this. On the federal priorities, are you thinking the same time frame for sort of finalizing it and bringing it to the board as the state priorities?
Yeah.
Okay, so they'll come to the board in the December meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll
great.
put these
so we'll
together.
do it together as one joint. Okay, that sounds great. Steve, anything else you want to add?
No, sir, I think that's it, and I'll just offer, we're certainly happy to help draft any of the agenda items and the backup that the board may want to consider, this committee may want to consider too.
Great. Also, thanks to Harry Glenn for inviting and having Congressman Bill Arakis come to our Dunedin Jolly Trolley 7-day-a-week kickoff event that Mary Beavis was there too. And it was great to have Congressman there riding. I think he stepped on the trolley. Maybe he rode around the block. I'm not sure. And And I know Harry invited him to that, so that was great.
Well, that's great.
I'll let them know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's great that we had him, and then we had Congressman Jolly for the grant announcement. Those are two nice events for PSTA. So, okay. Any other comments on the federal issues?
Do we have a time frame for our next trip up, Steve?
I was thinking about that when you were talking about the state trips. Not specifically, it'll probably be a little bit later than normal because with the new administration, there'll be changeover in the head of, Secretary of Transportation and the head of FTA, and the Congress will be focused on whatever priorities the new president proposes. So it may, and that usually doesn't, the budget goes up in early February, up to the Congress in early February. So obviously, we'll work with you and the staff in terms of trying to identify some target dates. Congress has not yet issued its schedule for next year, and we want to try to make sure that obviously you're here when the members of Congress are here, so you can talk to the delegation as well as any other members. But it probably would be in the late February, March timeframe, early March timeframe.
Mr. Chair, earlier today I met with Sean Sullivan, who is the Executive Director of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and as Commissioner Long, who I think you might be Vice Chair or Secretary of
Dr.
Treasury?
Rice and I are both on that board.
Okay. As you know, they are planning a transportation summit for
February 16th.
February 16th, 2017, and Mr. Sullivan, who prior to becoming the Executive Director here, worked for FTA in the federal level. So he is planning on an agenda that includes inviting some federal transit administration and federal highway administration officials to speak to come down here to Tampa Bay to speak at that meeting on February 16th.
Great.
So, Steve, if you're right that basically they will all be kind of in a wait mode until Congress starts and everything. Who knows what they're going to say? But that's something that we'll send out a calendar invite. I think Sean's sending one out, and then I'll forward it to the PSTA.
And to that point, I was just talking with Ron out in the hallway about this issue with the MPOs. And maybe that's an opportunity to have the 3 regional MPOs come to that transportation summit.
Oh yeah, they are.
And
Yeah.
along with WIT, and talk about how we move forward as a region. And if the feds are there, that'd be a great message to be sending to them, that we're all trying to work collaboratively. I just think that's the key to the future. We can't work in silos anymore. It hasn't worked for 50 years.
Nope.
Right?
More than right.
Time to change the model.
But yeah, so we will work around. I just wanted to mention that federal piece on, and then try to get on the calendars to go to Tallahassee and to go to DC in springtime.
Well, that's great. And I guess as we have a new administration in Washington and new players, we're going to want to get to know them. And so obviously,
Yeah.
Steve will be looking for your guidance as to the appropriate time and the best time we can get up there to start meeting people. I know that Brad has a relationship with Carolyn Flowers and some of these other current leaders in Washington policy, but we will need to make new relationships, I guess, with the new leaders. So, so thank you for your help today, Steve.
Absolutely. We'll be happy to help you on those dates, travel dates as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, any other business that we need to discuss today? Good. Well, we did this in about an hour. That's pretty good. So we'll adjourn. Now, our next meeting is scheduled for November 9th at 9 a.m. That is the day after the election.
Oh, boy.
So-
Oh, boy.
That might be a problem.
Why is that?
Well, we won't
Well,
have, we'll still be trying to.
Some people may be tired at 9 a.m.
Well, I will be out, I'm not gonna be here, Brad, I'll be out of the country.
Oh.
But we will need time to, I mean, we obviously do need to have a meeting in November so that we can,
Make a recommendation to the board.
right, finalize, see these as one-pagers, sort of finalize them, and then get them ready to go to the board in December. I was just wondering if that date worked for everybody.
Did you hear me say I'm not gonna?
You're out of town, right, yep.
We
So-
could use a couple of days too, so we could actually give you a full assessment of where everything landed, you know? 'cause it's gonna be-
Yeah, that's a very good
By
point.
November 9th?
She said we could use a couple days.
If I
so
had a
that-
couple days to,
so
you
that
know,
they could
figure out.
report on, I mean, I think it might make sense for this committee to meet the following week, not the week of the election.
There's gonna be some very tight races. There may be a few that aren't even decided that night.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the speaker usually make his committee appointments before organizational?
Usually, Corcoran has come out and said specifically that on November 9th, he'll be making his. Negron has not said. So,
I don't have it.
Okay, November the 9th, okay, November the 16th, planning is
Yeah,
at
it's
10:30.
Giving everybody a day.
Yeah.
He's gonna announce the next day. Who gets on what.
Do what? What, Rachel?
16th is not gonna work.
That's our regular, those are the other committees.
Well, maybe the best thing to do would be to have Rachel circulate a doodle poll
Yeah.
to the committee like we do our other scheduling.
No Fridays or Mondays.
Patty?
I mean, these are the only days that are good for everybody else. I'll just throw out there everything that Brad's available, and when we have a quorum,
Besides the other committees.
I mean, I just think doing this committee meeting immediately after the election without having time to sort of process where we landed doesn't quite make sense.
Agreed.
I think
Agreed.
it makes sense to,
Agreed.
I mean, we could still do the meeting in November, but have time for our legislative
well, and
meeting
again,
to
we're gonna go
process.
to organizational session on the 22nd, so you really want to land it between the 14th and the 18th.
Okay, well,
And
let's
that's
try.
your window to be in the right window
Yeah,
of
right.
time, is the 14th to the 18th, whatever days we
Well,
can
let's
make
try to
work.
set a meeting that week then, and Rachel we'll look at Brad's calendar and circulate some potential dates and times, okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right, great. So we'll look for that email, and anybody else, anything else for the good of the order? Okay,
Good.
adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.
Great.
Chair, for
Well done,
serving
Brad.
as our chair at least